Alexander Carter had everything money could buy, but his heart was frozen solid, trapped in ice colder than Chicago's harsh winter winds. 5 years ago, love died in his life forever. The successful businessman now lived each day like a machine, calculating profits instead of counting blessings. Catherine was his everything, his reason to believe in love. She had been the sunshine that melted away his doubts, whispering promises of forever. Then one rainy night changed everything. The phone call that shattered his world, teaching him that forever sometimes ends in a heartbeat. Now Alex believed love was just an illusion for fools. He had turned every photograph face down, choosing numbness over the risk of pain. His daughter Madison was growing up without a father's love, eating breakfast alone while he conducted business calls. Then Sophia Mitchell arrived from Texas, carrying secrets of her own and a suitcase full of hope. Alex hired her as Madison's nanny, nothing more. The interview was cold and professional, focused only on schedules and responsibilities. But Sophia saw what Alex couldn't, a family desperate for healing, hearts that were aching to love again but didn't know how to begin. Something about this woman made Alex uncomfortable. The way she brought laughter back into his house, the way Madison's eyes lit up. Sophia prayed every night for this broken family, asking God to heal the wounds that kept them apart. She brought warmth where coldness had reigned for years. Homemade cookies replaced takeout meals. Bedtime stories replaced silent evenings. Alex watched from his office through security cameras, feeling something stir in his chest that he thought had died with Catherine. When Sophia found Catherine's hidden photograph and asked about the beautiful woman in the picture, Alex exploded with suppressed fury. Love is a lie that destroys everything. Don't you dare mention her name in this house. His voice echoed through rooms that had once been filled with laughter. Madison heard every painful word from the stairs, tears streaming down her face as she realized how much her father was still hurting. That night, Sophia held Madison as she cried. "He's not angry at you," she whispered. "He's just scared to love again." Then Alex's business empire began crumbling. A major deal fell through, investors pulled out, and cracks threatened everything he'd worked for. When Madison fell critically ill with a high fever, Alex's worst fears returned. But Sophia remained steady, praying and caring with unwavering faith. For the first time in 5 years, Alex let someone see his pain. As they waited through the long night, Sophia's quiet strength began to crack the walls around his heart. Before we continue this incredible journey of healing, let us know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Alex Carter's interview with Sophia Mitchell was scheduled for exactly 30 minutes. He had no interest in small talk or getting to know her personally. This was strictly business. He needed someone reliable to manage Madison's schedule while he focused on what truly mattered, his empire. Sophia stood in the pristine hallway, taking in the cold elegance of a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Every surface gleamed with perfection, yet something essential was missing from these walls. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of an expensive grandfather clock that seemed to count down the moments of joy this family had lost. "Your references are adequate," Alex said without looking up from her resume, treating her like just another business transaction. The position requires punctuality, discretion, and the ability to follow instructions precisely. Madison has a structured routine that cannot be disrupted under any circumstances. His tone was clipped and businesslike, treating the interview like a corporate merger rather than hiring someone to care for his daughter. Sophia nodded respectfully, though her heart ached for the pain she could sense beneath his cold exterior. She had seen this kind of protective armor before in her own life, knew the weight of carrying grief that felt too heavy to bear alone. "What makes you think you're qualified to work in this household?" Alex asked, his blue eyes searching for any sign of weakness or sentimentality that might threaten his carefully controlled world. Sophia met his gaze steadily, unflinching under his scrutiny. "I believe every child deserves to feel loved and secure, Mr. Carter." I've worked with families going through difficult transitions before, and I understand that healing takes time and patience. Her words hung in the air like a challenge Alex wasn't prepared for. Something about her quiet confidence and unwavering compassion unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain or control. Madison appeared at the top of the staircase, having heard unfamiliar voices drifting from her father's office. She rarely saw visitors in their home anymore, and curiosity drew her down the marble steps like a magnet, pulling her towards something she desperately needed. "Dad, who's here?" she called out, her young voice echoing in the vast space that had once been filled with laughter. Alex's jaw tightened with visible annoyance at the interruption, but Sophia's face immediately brightened with genuine warmth. This was the moment that would change everything. When two lonely souls first looked into each other's eyes and recognized a kindred spirit searching for the same thing, a place to belong. "You must be Madison," Sophia said, kneeling down to meet the girl at eye level with the kind of attention the teenager had been craving for years. "I am Sophia Mitchell. Your father is considering hiring me to spend time with you while he works." Madison's eyes lit up with interest and hope. She couldn't remember the last time an adult had spoken to her with such genuine care and focus. "What will we do together?" Madison asked eagerly, her voice betraying the loneliness she'd been hiding. Sophia smiled with authentic warmth. "Whatever makes you happy. Maybe we could bake cookies, read stories, work on art projects, or just talk about your day. What brings you the most joy?" Alex watched this interaction with growing discomfort, seeing his daughter respond with more enthusiasm and life than she'd shown in months. "Madison, return to your room immediately. We're not finished here," Alex interrupted sharply, his voice cutting through the tender moment like shards of ice shattering something beautiful. Madison's smile faded instantly, replaced by the familiar look of disappointment and rejection she wore whenever her father dismissed her from his presence. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her shoulders slumping as she turned to climb the stairs with the defeated posture of someone who had learned not to expect warmth. Sophia watched the girl retreat, her heart breaking for both father and daughter who were drowning in their separate oceans of loneliness. She could see how desperately they needed each other, yet invisible walls of fear and unprocessed grief kept them apart, like prisoners in their own home. Alex returned to his desk, shuffling papers unnecessarily to regain his composure and re-establish the professional distance that had been breached by Madison's unexpected appearance. "As I was saying, the position is straightforward. Madison needs supervision, nothing more." But Sophia had seen something in that brief interaction that Alex was desperately trying to hide, a father who loved his daughter deeply but had forgotten how to show it. "Mr. Carter, with respect, I think Madison needs more than supervision. She needs someone who will listen to her, encourage her dreams, and help her navigate the challenges of growing up." Her words struck him like arrows finding their mark, and for a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing the vulnerable man hiding beneath the successful businessman's facade. Alex stood abruptly and turned toward the window, unable to face the truth he saw reflected in Sophia's knowing eyes. "You don't understand the situation here, Miss Mitchell. Madison has everything she needs, the best schools, tutors, opportunities that most children could only dream of." His voice carried a defensive edge that betrayed his own doubts about the emotional poverty in which they both lived. Sophia remained seated, studying his rigid posture and clenched fists. "Material things are important, but they can't replace the human connection every child craves, Mr. Carter. Madison is lucky to have so many advantages, but I can see she's hungry for something money can't buy." Her gentle but direct words hit their target with devastating accuracy. When Alex turned back to face Sophia, she could see the internal battle raging behind his eyes, the war between his desire to protect his heart and his recognition that Madison was slipping away from him day by day. "The salary is generous, the hours are clearly defined, and I expect results. Can you handle that?" His question was really asking something else entirely. Could she handle working for a man who had forgotten how to be human, in a house where love had been locked away like a dangerous secret? Sophia nodded with quiet confidence. I can handle whatever this family needs, Mr. Carter. The question is whether you're ready to let someone help you both heal. Her words hung between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he had the courage to cross. Within hours of being hired, Sophia had transformed the sterile living room into a space of creativity and joy, spreading art supplies across the coffee table, while Madison giggled at her stories about growing up in Texas. The sound of his daughter's genuine laughter stopped Alex in his tracks as he passed the doorway, a sound he hadn't heard in so long he'd forgotten how much he missed it. Madison was animated in ways he'd never seen before, her face glowing with excitement as Sophia showed her how to mix watercolors to create the perfect shade of sunset orange. Alex found himself lingering in the shadows, watching this scene of domestic happiness with a mixture of longing and fear. Part of him wanted to join them, but a larger part warned him that getting too involved would only lead to more heartbreak when Sophia inevitably left their lives just like everyone else had. Sophia's first official day at the Carter house began with a tour through rooms that felt more like a luxury hotel than a family home. Every surface was pristine and untouched, as if life itself had been carefully scrubbed away along with any traces of warmth or personality. The walls were painted in cold neutrals, whites, grays, and beiges that spoke of professional decorators rather than personal choices. She noticed immediately what was missing: family photographs, children's artwork on the refrigerator, throw pillows that showed signs of being actually used for comfort. This wasn't a home where people lived and loved. It was a beautiful mausoleum where two broken hearts went through the motions of existing. Sophia's trained eye, honed by years of working with grieving families, recognized all the telltale signs of a household frozen in time. The kitchen told an even sadder story than the living areas. Despite having top-of-the-line appliances that most home cooks would envy, the refrigerator contained only takeout containers and bottled water. The cabinets held a few basic items, but nothing that suggested anyone actually cooked meals here. Sophia found herself wondering when this family had last shared a homemade dinner together, when they'd last gathered around this beautiful island to talk about their days or make memories over freshly baked cookies. The expensive copper pots hanging from the rack looked like they'd never seen a flame, and the stunning gas range appeared to be more decorative than functional. This kitchen was designed for a family that no longer knew how to be a family, and Sophia's heart ached for the warmth and nourishment, both physical and emotional, that was missing from this space. Madison sat at the breakfast bar with a bowl of cold cereal, her shoulders hunched in the posture of someone who had grown accustomed to eating alone. She looked up when Sophia entered, her blue eyes brightening slightly but still guarded, as if she wasn't quite sure whether this new presence in her life would stay or disappear like so many others had. "Good morning, sweetie," Sophia said with genuine warmth, noting how the girl's face immediately responded to the endearment. "How did you sleep?" It was such a simple question. The kind parents asked their children every morning around the world, but Madison looked surprised that anyone had bothered to inquire about her well-being. "Okay, I guess," she mumbled, pushing the cereal around in her bowl. Sophia could see that this child was starving for attention and conversation, for someone to notice her and care about the small details of her daily experience. As they moved to the living room, Sophia gently began asking Madison about her routines, her school, her friends, and her interests. With each question, the girl seemed to unfold a little more, like a flower that had been waiting for sunlight. "Dad likes things to stay the same," Madison explained, glancing around at the perfectly arranged but lifeless room. "He says routines are important for success." Sophia nodded understanding, recognizing the survival mechanism this family had developed. "Routines can be helpful," she agreed carefully, "but there's also room for spontaneity and fun. What kinds of things do you wish you could do that maybe aren't part of your regular schedule?" Madison's eyes lit up with possibilities she'd apparently never been encouraged to voice. This was the beginning of Sophia's gentle mission to breathe life back into this house, one small change at a time. From his office, Alex conducted a series of important business calls, but found himself distracted by the soft murmur of conversation coming from the living room. He could hear Madison's voice more animated than it had been in months, punctuated by Sophia's encouraging responses and genuine laughter. Part of him was relieved that his daughter seemed happier, but a larger part felt threatened by how easily this stranger had accomplished what he'd been unable to do. During a brief pause between calls, he found himself straining to hear what they were discussing, curious despite himself about what could be making Madison sound so engaged. The sound of his daughter's happiness should have filled him with joy, but instead it reminded him of everything he'd lost the ability to provide: warmth, connection, and the simple pleasure of being present for another person's joys and concerns. By lunchtime, Sophia had begun the first of many small rebellions against the sterile perfection of the Carter household. Instead of ordering takeout, as was the apparent custom, she suggested they prepare a simple meal together. "But we don't really cook here," Madison said uncertainly, glancing toward her father's office as if expecting to be scolded for the very suggestion. "Well, maybe it's time to start," Sophia replied with a conspiratorial smile. Cooking together is one of the best ways for people to connect and create memories. Plus, food always tastes better when it's made with love. As they worked side by side washing vegetables and preparing sandwiches, Madison began to relax in ways Sophia suspected she hadn't in years. The simple act of creating something together, of being useful and included, brought color to the girl's cheeks and light to her eyes. Sophia suggested they eat in the formal dining room rather than at the kitchen bar, and worked with Madison to set the table properly with cloth napkins and the good china that had apparently been collecting dust. "Dad never uses this room," Madison confided as they arranged fresh flowers Sophia had picked from the small garden outside. "He says it's too much trouble for just everyday meals." Sophia smiled. "Sometimes the everyday moments are exactly when we need a little extra beauty and ceremony. Every meal is a chance to pause, be grateful, and connect with the people we care about." She was teaching Madison that she deserved attention and care in small daily rituals, that her presence was worth the effort of setting a beautiful table. These were lessons the girl had never learned but desperately needed. Lessons about her own value and the importance of creating joy in ordinary moments. When Alex finally emerged from his office for a quick lunch break, he stopped short at the sight of the dining room transformed. The table was set with care. Fresh flowers created a centerpiece he hadn't seen in years, and both Sophia and Madison looked at him with expectant, hopeful faces. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice carrying surprise and something that might have been displeasure. "We made lunch together," Madison said, her excitement barely contained. "Sophia showed me how to arrange flowers and set a proper table. Don't you think it looks nice?" Alex felt cornered by their enthusiasm, uncomfortable with this disruption to his carefully controlled environment. The beauty they'd created reminded him painfully of meals he'd shared with Catherine, of family traditions he'd deliberately abandoned because they hurt too much to maintain. This wasn't just lunch. It was an invitation back into a life he'd sworn off forever. The meal proceeded with Alex eating mechanically while Sophia attempted to engage him in light conversation about Madison's day and interests. Madison watched her father hopefully, clearly wanting him to notice and appreciate the effort they'd made, but his responses were monosyllabic and distant. "Madison told me she's interested in art," Sophia ventured. "Perhaps we could visit a museum this weekend, or maybe sign her up for a painting class." Alex looked up sharply. Her schedule is already full with academic tutoring and preparation for high school entrance exams. There's no time for frivolous activities. The word frivolous hit Madison like a physical blow, and Sophia watched the girl's face crumple with disappointment. In that moment, Sophia realized just how much work lay ahead of her in helping this family rediscover not just love, but the simple appreciation for beauty, creativity, and the things that make life worth living. After Alex retreated to his office, closing the door with a finality that felt like rejection, Sophia and Madison cleaned up the dishes together in contemplative silence. "He doesn't mean to be harsh," Madison said quietly, though her voice betrayed her hurt. He used to be different. Before Mom died, he would laugh and joke, and we'd have these amazing family dinners where we'd talk for hours." Sophia's heart broke for both of them. For the girl who remembered what love looked like, but couldn't access it anymore. And for the father who was so afraid of being hurt again that he was hurting the one person he had left. "Your father loves you very much, Madison," Sophia said gently. "Sometimes when people are in pain, they forget how to show love, but that doesn't mean it's not there." As they finished putting away the dishes, Sophia made a silent promise to herself and to this broken family. She would find a way to help them heal, no matter how long it took or how much resistance she encountered. 3 weeks into Sophia's employment, Madison had begun to bloom like a flower finally receiving sunlight after a long winter. The transformation was remarkable. Where once she had been quiet and withdrawn, now she filled the house with laughter and animated conversations about everything from her favorite books to her dreams for the future. They spent afternoons working on art projects that would have horrified Alex with their creative mess, painting watercolor landscapes and crafting friendship bracelets while discussing Madison's hopes and fears. "I forgot how much I love making things," Madison confided as she carefully mixed purple and blue to create the perfect shade for sunset. "Dad used to paint with me when I was little before." Her voice trailed off, but Sophia understood. Before grief had stolen away the father who used to encourage creativity and joy. From his office doorway, Alex found himself pausing more frequently to watch these scenes of domestic happiness that he both craved and feared. Madison's animated storytelling filled spaces that had been silent for years, her gestures expressive and her face glowing with life he'd forgotten she possessed. When had she become so articulate, so confident in sharing her thoughts and feelings? Sophia listened with the kind of patient attention he remembered giving his daughter once upon a time, before work became his refuge from painful memories. He felt a complicated mix of gratitude and jealousy watching someone else succeed where he had failed so completely. The businessman in him recognized Sophia's competence, but the father in him ached with the knowledge that his daughter was flourishing under someone else's care because he had forgotten how to provide what she needed most. During their evening routine, Madison had begun opening up about the deeper hurts she'd been carrying alone for so long. As Sophia helped her brush her long blonde hair, a ritual no one had shared with her since Catherine died, the girl's carefully guarded secrets began to emerge. "I miss having someone tuck me in and ask about my day," Madison admitted quietly. "I miss feeling like someone cares if I'm happy or sad." Sophia's heart ached for this child who had been emotionally orphaned by her father's grief. "Your father cares more than you know, sweetheart. Sometimes when adults are hurting, they forget how to show love, but that doesn't mean the love isn't there." Madison considered this thoughtfully. "Do you think he'll ever be happy again? Do you think he'll ever want to be my dad again instead of just my guardian?" Over breakfast preparations that had become their favorite time to talk, Madison began sharing memories of her mother and the family they used to be. "Mom made the most amazing pancakes shaped like animals," she said wistfully, mixing batter with growing confidence. "Dad would help her, and they'd compete to see who could make the funniest shapes. We'd eat breakfast and laugh until our sides hurt." Sophia smiled encouragingly. "Those sound like beautiful memories. What happened to change things?" Madison's expression grew sad. "After the funeral, Dad put away all of Mom's things and said we needed to move forward. But moving forward felt like forgetting her, and I didn't want to forget. So we just stopped talking about her, stopped doing the things we used to do as a family." This insight helped Sophia understand the depth of the healing this family needed. They hadn't just lost Catherine. They'd lost their identity as a family. The sounds of Madison's genuine happiness drifted into Alex's office like music he'd forgotten existed, pulling his attention away from quarterly reports and budget projections. He found himself stopping mid-sentence during conference calls, distracted by his daughter's laughter echoing through halls that had been silent as a tomb. When had she become so talkative, so full of life? When had her voice taken on that confident tone that reminded him painfully of Catherine? Part of him wanted to join them in the kitchen, to remember what it felt like to be part of Madison's joy instead of just an observer of it. But every time he considered walking through that doorway, fear paralyzed him. What if he ruined this happiness she'd found? What if his presence brought back the shadows that Sophia had worked so hard to chase away? So he remained in his office, a prisoner of his own making, listening to his daughter flourish under someone else's nurturing care. One evening, Alex discovered Sophia reading to Madison in the living room, something he hadn't done since his daughter was very young. They were curled up together on the sofa that had gone unused for years, sharing a book and discussing the characters like old friends. Madison's head rested against Sophia's shoulder with the trust of a child who felt completely secure and loved. The intimacy of the moment stopped Alex in his tracks. This was what family looked like, what love in action resembled. He remembered reading bedtime stories to Madison when she was small, remembered how she would curl up against him exactly the same way, trusting and content. When had he stopped being the person she turned to for comfort? When had he become so afraid of his own daughter's need for affection that he'd abandoned one of fatherhood's greatest privileges? After Madison had gone to bed, Alex found himself lingering in the kitchen where Sophia was preparing ingredients for the next day's meals, another small rebellion against the sterile efficiency that had ruled his household. "She seems different," he said awkwardly, and used to discussing his daughter's emotional well-being with anyone. "Different how?" Sophia asked gently, continuing to work but giving him her full attention. Alex struggled to find words for changes he could see but couldn't quite articulate. "Happier. More like she used to be before." He couldn't finish the sentence, but Sophia understood. "Madison is a remarkable girl with so much love to give. She just needed someone to remind her that she's worthy of love in return." Her words hit him like a gentle but precise arrow, targeting the guilt he carried about his failures as a father. For the first time in years, Alex felt the urge to confide in another adult about the weight he'd been carrying alone. "I don't know how to be your father anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I do feels wrong, and everything I don't do feels worse. She deserves so much better than what I've been able to give her." Sophia paused in her work, recognizing the significance of this moment, the first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "Parenting after loss is one of the hardest things anyone can face, Mr. Carter. You've been trying to protect Madison from more pain, but sometimes protection can feel like abandonment to a child who just wants to know her remaining parent loves her." Her words were gentle but honest, offering understanding without excusing the damage that had been done. Sophia turned to face Alex directly, her green eyes reflecting both compassion and determination. "Madison doesn't need you to be perfect, Mr. Carter. She just needs you to be present. She needs to know that losing her mother didn't mean losing her father too." The truth in her words cut through his defenses like a blade, exposing the fear that had been driving his behavior for 5 long years. What if I fail her again? What if I can't be what she needs? His questions revealed the vulnerable man hiding behind the successful businessman's facade. Sophia stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "The only way you can truly fail Madison is by continuing to stay away from her heart. She's growing up, and every day you spend hiding in your office is a day you can't get back. But it's not too late to start showing up for her life." After Sophia had gone to her room, Alex stood alone in the kitchen, processing their conversation and feeling emotions he'd kept buried for half a decade. The house around him felt different somehow, not just because of the physical changes Sophia had made, but because of the life and love she'd reintroduced into spaces that had become emotional deserts. He found himself looking toward the staircase where Madison slept, probably dreaming the dreams of a 13-year-old girl who was finally beginning to believe in happiness again. For the first time since Catherine's death, Alex allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to be a real father again, to be someone Madison could count on for more than just financial support and academic pressure. The thought terrified him, but it also stirred something that felt dangerously close to hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim the relationship he'd sacrificed to grief and fear. While cleaning Alex's office, Sophia discovered something that stopped her heart. A wedding photograph tucked behind a row of business books, hidden like a guilty secret. Catherine looked radiant in her white dress, her chestnut hair flowing over her shoulders as she gazed adoringly at a younger Alex who was smiling with pure joy. This wasn't the cold, distant man Sophia knew. This was someone who had once believed in forever, someone who had known how to love without fear. The photograph was dusty from years of concealment, but the love captured in that moment seemed to glow with an eternal light. Sophia held it carefully, understanding that she was looking at the ghost that haunted this house, the love that Alex had buried along with his wife. She knew she should put it back, respect his choice to hide from this painful reminder, but something in her heart told her that healing couldn't begin until this love was acknowledged rather than denied. Sophia sat in the living room, studying the photograph and trying to understand the depth of loss this family had endured. The love between Alex and Catherine was visible in every detail. The way he held her, the way she looked at him, the pure happiness radiating from both their faces. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a fairy tale romance that had been shattered by tragedy. Madison appeared from the kitchen, drawn by something unusual in Sophia's posture. When the girl saw what Sophia was holding, her face lit up with a mixture of joy and pain. "That's my parents' wedding picture," she whispered, moving closer with reverent steps. "I haven't seen it in years. Dad hid all the pictures of Mom after she died." He said looking at them made it harder to move forward, but I think he was just afraid of remembering how happy we used to be. Madison settled beside Sophia on the sofa, her young face filled with longing as she gazed at the image of her parents' happier days. "They were so in love," she said softly, tracing her mother's face with a gentle finger. "Dad used to look at Mom like she was the most amazing thing in the world. He'd bring her flowers for no reason, write her little notes, and they'd dance in the kitchen while making dinner." Tears began to form in Madison's eyes as she remembered a father who bore no resemblance to the distant man who now raised her. "I used to think I want to love like theirs someday, but now I'm scared. What if loving someone that much just means you'll hurt that much when you lose them?" Sophia's heart broke for this child who was learning to fear love instead of embrace it, whose father's grief had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of opening your heart. Alex returned from a business meeting to find Sophia and Madison huddled together over something on the sofa, their voices soft with emotion. As he approached, he realized with growing horror what they were looking at, the wedding photograph he'd hidden away like evidence of a crime he'd rather forget. His briefcase fell from suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sound like thunder. The two people he'd been trying to protect from his pain had found his most carefully guarded secret, the image that could still bring him to his knees with the force of what he'd lost. "What are you doing with that?" His voice came out harsher than he'd intended, cracking like a whip across the tender moment they'd been sharing. Both Sophia and Madison looked up with startled expressions, caught in the act of remembering a love that Alex had decided was too dangerous to acknowledge. Alex advanced toward them with the controlled fury of a man whose deepest wound had been exposed without permission. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What gives you the right to go through my private things?" Sophia stood slowly, positioning herself slightly in front of Madison in an instinctively protective gesture. "I was cleaning your office and found it by accident," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. Madison was just sharing some beautiful memories of her parents. The word parents, plural, acknowledging Catherine as an ongoing presence in their lives, hit Alex like a physical blow. "Those memories are private," he snapped. "They don't belong to you, and they certainly don't belong in this conversation." Madison shrank back against the sofa cushions, recognizing the warning signs of one of her father's emotional shutdowns, the moments when he became a stranger who shared nothing but DNA with the loving man in the photograph. Sophia held the photograph carefully, refusing to be intimidated by Alex's barely controlled rage. "Madison has a right to remember her mother, Mr. Carter. Catherine was her parent too, and pretending she never existed isn't protecting your daughter. It's stealing her heritage." Her words were gentle but unflinching, spoken with the authority of someone who understood grief but refused to let it become a weapon against the living. Alex's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't understand what you're talking about," he said through gritted teeth. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything that matters, to have your entire world destroyed in one phone call. That woman, He gestured at the photograph like it was contaminated. That life, it's gone. Dead. And digging up corpses doesn't help anyone heal. His words were brutal, designed to wound. But Sophia stood her ground with quiet strength that seemed to come from some deep well of faith and understanding. Madison couldn't bear to listen to her father speak about her mother, like she was something to be ashamed of, something that needed to be buried and forgotten. "She's not dead to me," the girl cried, tears streaming down her face as she jumped to her feet. "Mom is still part of who I am, part of who we are as a family. Just because you want to pretend she never existed doesn't mean I have to forget the only parent who ever really loved me." Her words hit Alex like bullets, each one finding its mark in his already wounded heart. This was his greatest fear realized, that his inability to process his grief had driven a wedge between him and the one person he had left to love. Madison was looking at him with a mixture of pain and defiance. No longer the compliant child who had learned to tiptoe around his emotional landmines, but a young woman who was tired of living in the shadow of his unhealed wounds. Love is a lie that destroys everything. Alex exploded, his voice echoing through the house like thunder, years of suppressed agony finally erupting in a volcanic outburst of pain and rage. It's a beautiful fantasy that makes you believe in forever, and then it abandons you with nothing but ashes and memories that feel like knives in your chest. "Don't you dare mention her name in this house again." His face was contorted with anguish, transformed by grief into something barely recognizable as the composed businessman who usually inhabited these walls. Sophia and Madison stood together, weathering the storm of his breakdown, understanding that this wasn't really anger at them, but fury at a universe that had stolen his happiness and left him with nothing but fear. The man in the wedding photograph was screaming his pain at the cold stranger he'd become, and the sound was heartbreaking in its raw, desperate honesty. Madison fled to the staircase, crouching behind the railing like she had so many times before when her father's grief became too big for the house to contain. Her sobs were quiet but devastating, the sound of a child's heart breaking as she realized that the father she remembered was truly gone, replaced by this angry stranger who spoke of love like it was a disease to be avoided. From her hiding place, she watched Sophia face her father's rage with remarkable calm, neither running away nor fighting back, but simply standing witness to his pain with the kind of strength Madison had never seen before. Alex stood alone in the aftermath of his outburst, breathing heavily, his face reflecting the horror of what he'd just done. Not just the explosion itself, but the damage it had inflicted on the two people he most wanted to protect from the poison of his unhealed wounds. That night, after the house had fallen into an uneasy quiet, Sophia knelt beside her bed in prayer as she did every evening. But tonight her heart carried a heavier burden than usual. She prayed for Alex, trapped in a prison of his own making, too afraid of being hurt again to risk loving the daughter who desperately needed him. She prayed for Madison, who was learning to associate love with loss and pain instead of joy and security. And she prayed for Catherine, the woman whose love still lived in the walls of this house, whose memory deserved to be honored rather than hidden like a shameful secret. "Lord," she whispered, "help me be a bridge between their hearts. Help me show them that love isn't the enemy. Fear is. Give me the wisdom to help this family heal, even if it means walking through the fire of their grief beside them." Her prayer was not for her own comfort or success, but for the healing of two wounded souls who had forgotten that love, even when it involves loss, is always worth the risk. 2 days after the confrontation about Catherine's photograph, Alex's carefully constructed world began crumbling in ways that had nothing to do with family drama. The emergency board meeting had been called after their biggest client, Henderson Industries, unexpectedly terminated their contract, citing concerns about management stability and company direction. The financial projections on the conference table painted a grim picture. Without Henderson's account, Carter Technologies would face its first quarterly loss in a decade. Alex stared at the numbers, feeling the familiar sensation of control slipping through his fingers like sand. The executives around the table watched him with barely concealed panic, waiting for the decisive leadership that had built this empire from nothing. But for the first time in his professional career, Alex felt paralyzed by the weight of responsibility and the crushing realization that even his business success, the one thing he thought he could control, was as fragile as everything else he'd ever loved. Back in his home office that night, Alex worked frantically to find solutions to problems that seemed to multiply faster than he could address them. Stock prices were falling, employees were nervous about layoffs, and potential investors were asking uncomfortable questions about the company's long-term viability. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd thrown himself into work to escape the chaos of emotions, only to discover that business was just as unpredictable and painful as matters of the heart. As he scrolled through endless spreadsheets and market analyses, he could hear the soft sounds of life continuing in the rest of his house. Sophia was helping Madison with homework, their quiet voices a counterpoint to the storm of professional crisis consuming his thoughts. For a moment, he envied their simple interaction, remembering when his biggest concern had been helping with math problems instead of calculating survival strategies for a failing empire. Meanwhile, Sophia and Madison had noticed Alex's increased stress and decided to respond with the kind of care that came naturally to hearts unafraid of showing love. Without discussing it explicitly, they began preparing his favorite meals, leaving them where he would find them during his late-night work sessions. Madison remembered that her father used to love homemade chicken soup when he was feeling overwhelmed, and Sophia taught her how to prepare it from scratch, filling the kitchen with aromas that spoke of comfort and nurturing. "Do you think he'll notice?" Madison asked as they carefully arranged a dinner tray with cloth napkins and fresh flowers from the garden. Sophia smiled gently. "Even if he doesn't say anything, sweetie, acts of love have a way of reaching people's hearts when they need it most. Sometimes we plant seeds of kindness, not knowing when they'll bloom, but trusting that they will when the time is right." When Alex finally emerged from his office near midnight, he discovered a beautifully arranged dinner tray sitting outside his door like an offering from guardian angels. The homemade soup was still warm in a thermos, accompanied by fresh bread and a handwritten note in Madison's careful script. "Dad, we know you're working hard, and we wanted you to know we're thinking about you. Love, Madison and Sophia." The simple gesture hit him with unexpected force, penetrating the armor of cynicism and self-reliance he'd built around his heart. For a moment, he stood frozen in the hallway, holding the note and feeling emotions he'd spent 5 years trying to suppress. Part of him wanted to march into the kitchen and thank them properly, to acknowledge the thoughtfulness and care they'd shown. But the larger part of him, the part that had learned to associate love with inevitable loss, whispered warnings about the dangers of accepting such kindness. What if he let them in and then lost them too? What if caring about their gestures only made him more vulnerable to the kind of devastating pain he'd barely survived once before? Despite his emotional defenses, Alex found himself in the kitchen eating the soup and bread they'd prepared, tasting not just the food but the love that had gone into its preparation. The chicken soup was perfect, exactly the way Catherine used to make it, he realized with a start. Had Madison remembered the recipe, or had Sophia somehow intuited his preferences? Either possibility suggested a level of attention and care that both warmed and terrified him. As he sat alone in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the life Sophia had brought back into their home, fresh flowers, family photos Madison had cautiously returned to their places, the lingering sense of homemade cooking, Alex felt the first real cracks forming in the walls he'd built around his heart. These two females upstairs, sleeping peacefully, had somehow managed to create a sanctuary in the house he'd turned into an emotional wasteland. The thought both amazed and frightened him more than any business crisis ever could. The next morning brought more encouraging cards from Madison, hand-drawn pictures with messages like, "You're the strongest person I know," and "I believe in you, Dad." Each one carefully placed where Alex would find them during his daily routine. Sophia and Madison worked together in the kitchen, preparing a breakfast that was both nourishing and beautiful, Their conversation focused on ways they could support Alex through his professional difficulties without overwhelming him with attention he might reject. "I wish I could do more to help him," Madison confided as she carefully arranged fresh fruit on his plate. "He seems so alone with all his worries. And I remember when Mom was alive, they used to talk through everything together. She was like his partner in solving problems, not just in business, but in life." Sophia nodded understanding. "Your father is learning to trust again, sweetheart. Sometimes the best thing we can do for someone we love is simply show up consistently, day after day, proving that we're not going anywhere even when things get difficult." From his office doorway, Alex observed these morning rituals of care with growing awareness of what he'd been missing. Madison's artwork covered the refrigerator now, not just the encouragement cards for him, but drawings of their family, memories of Catherine, and dreams for their future. Sophia moved through the kitchen with the natural grace of someone who understood that nurturing others was a sacred act, teaching Madison not just cooking techniques, but life lessons about the importance of caring for people you love. For the first time in years, Alex allowed himself to really see what was happening in his home, not just the surface activities, but the deeper healing taking place. These two remarkable females were rebuilding the foundation of love and trust that his grief had nearly destroyed. The businessman in him recognized their strategic approach, consistent, patient, non-threatening gestures designed to slowly win over a reluctant client. But the father and man in him recognized something even more powerful: authentic love offered without conditions or expectations of return. That evening, Alex made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of retreating immediately to his office after dinner, he lingered in the living room where Sophia was helping Madison with algebra homework. The scene reminded him painfully of evenings when Catherine had sat in that exact spot, patiently explaining math concepts while he worked on his laptop nearby, all of them together in comfortable domesticity. "Is there anything I can help with?" he asked awkwardly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth after years of avoiding such interactions. Madison looked up with startled hope, while Sophia smiled with quiet encouragement. "We're working on quadratic equations," Madison said tentatively, as if afraid he might change his mind and disappear. "I think I understand the concept, but I'm having trouble with the practical applications." Alex moved closer, his business-trained mind actually finding relief in the concrete logic of mathematics after days of emotional and professional chaos. As Alex worked through math problems with Madison, something magical began to happen. The awkwardness faded, replaced by the natural rhythm of a teacher and student, a father and daughter connecting over shared intellectual challenges. Madison's face glowed with pleasure at having her father's undivided attention, while Alex rediscovered the satisfaction of helping his daughter succeed. Sophia watched this interaction with quiet joy, recognizing it as the first genuine father-daughter moment she'd witnessed in their household. The way Madison hung on Alex's every word, the pride in her eyes when he praised her problem-solving skills, the gradual relaxation in his posture as he remembered how much he enjoyed being needed by his child, all of it spoke to the deep love that had always existed between them, just waiting for permission to resurface. For 45 minutes, the living room felt like a real family space, filled with the kind of ordinary magic that happens when people stop being afraid to care about each other. After Madison had gone to bed with a good-night hug that lasted longer than any they'd shared in years, Alex found himself alone in the living room, looking at the family photographs that had quietly reappeared on shelves and tables over the past few weeks. Catherine smiled at him from their wedding day, from Madison's baptism, from family vacations when their biggest concern was whether they'd packed enough sunscreen. But for the first time, looking at these images didn't feel like staring into an abyss of loss. Instead, he felt something that might have been gratitude for the love they'd shared, for the daughter they'd created together, for the woman in his kitchen who had risked his anger to help them both remember that Catherine's memory deserved celebration rather than burial. The sound of Sophia quietly cleaning up after their evening together drifted from the kitchen, and Alex realized with startling clarity that he was beginning to look forward to her presence rather than simply tolerate it. She had become more than Madison's caregiver. She had become the bridge between his broken past and the possibility of a healing future, and that realization both thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. 3 days after their breakthrough homework session, Madison woke up with a fever that sent immediate panic through Alex's carefully reconstructed world. Sophia discovered her that morning, burning with heat and shivering with chills that reminded her of other children she cared for who had fallen seriously ill. The thermometer read 103.2 degrees, and Madison's usually bright blue eyes were glazed with the disorientation that comes with high fever. "I don't feel good, Sophia," she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. "Everything hurts, and I feel so cold, even though I know I'm hot." Sophia's heart clenched with protective worry, but she forced herself to remain calm and reassuring. "I know, sweetheart. We're going to take very good care of you, and you're going to be just fine." Even as she spoke the words, she was mentally calculating symptoms and timelines, remembering too many times when a simple fever had turned into something much more serious. Sophia's urgent knocking on Alex's bedroom door shattered his sleep like gunfire. "Mr. Carter, please wake up. Madison is very sick. She has a high fever, and I think we need to get her to a doctor right away." The words hit Alex like ice water, instantly transporting him back 5 years to another frantic morning, another emergency call, another moment when his world tilted off its axis without warning. He was out of bed and pulling on clothes before he was fully awake, his hands shaking as he tried to button his shirt. The terror that flooded his system was primal and overwhelming. Not the calculated concern of a responsible parent, but the raw panic of a man who had already lost everything once and couldn't survive losing it again. How high is her fever? When did it start? Did she eat anything unusual yesterday? The questions tumbled out of him in rapid succession, his voice tight with barely controlled fear that made Sophia's heart ache for both father and daughter. When Alex burst into Madison's room, the sight of his daughter's flushed face and labored breathing triggered memories he'd spent 5 years trying to suppress. Catherine's last illness had started exactly like this, with what seemed like a simple flu that everyone assured him would pass in a few days. "Madison, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" His voice came out strained and artificial, betraying the terror he was trying to hide from his sick child. Madison looked up at him with fever-bright eyes that seemed to see straight through his facade of control. "Dad, I'm scared," she whispered, and those 3 words shattered what remained of his composure. He hadn't heard her call him Dad with that kind of vulnerable trust in years, and the timing, when she was sick and frightened and possibly in danger, felt like the universe's cruelest joke. Sophia watched Alex's face transform from businessman to terrified father, recognizing the depth of trauma that a simple childhood fever had unleashed. The emergency room became Alex's personal hell, every beeping machine and antiseptic smell triggering flashbacks to the night he'd lost Catherine. Madison lay on the examination table looking small and vulnerable while doctors ran tests and asked questions that felt like accusations. Had he noticed earlier symptoms? Why hadn't he brought her in sooner? Was there a family history of serious illness? Alex answered mechanically while his mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios, each more devastating than the last. Sophia remained steady beside Madison's bed, holding the girl's hand and speaking in low, soothing tones that seemed to calm both father and daughter. "The doctors are very smart, Madison," she said gently. "They're going to figure out exactly what's making you feel bad, and then they'll make you better. Your dad and I are right here, and we're not going anywhere." Her calm strength was a lifeline in the chaos of Alex's panic, reminding him that not every medical emergency ended in tragedy. While Madison dozed fitfully between tests, Alex retreated to the hospital hallway where he could fall apart without frightening his daughter. Sophia found him there, leaning against the wall with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "She can't die," he whispered, his voice broken and raw. "I can't lose her too. I wouldn't survive it. I barely survived losing Catherine, and Madison is all I have left." The confession poured out of him like blood from a wound, 5 years of terror and grief finally finding voice. Sophia moved closer, her presence radiating the kind of peace that comes from unshakable faith. "Madison is going to be fine, Mr. Carter. Sometimes our worst fears make us forget that most illnesses are treatable, that most crises have solutions. You're not going to lose her." Her words carried a certainty that penetrated his panic, reminding him that fear was not the same thing as prophecy, that loving someone inevitably involved risk, but that risk didn't guarantee loss. By midnight, Madison's fever had broken, and the doctors confirmed what Sophia had quietly believed all along. It was a severe but manageable flu virus that would respond well to rest and medication. The relief that flooded through Alex was so intense it left him dizzy, like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for hours, suddenly breaking the surface. Madison slept peacefully now, her color returning to normal, her breathing steady and unlabored. The crisis was over, but its impact on Alex was just beginning. As he watched his daughter sleep, he realized how close he'd come to losing precious time with her, not to death, but to his own fear of living. Sophia had remained by his side through the entire ordeal, never once suggesting that his panic was unreasonable or his fears unfounded. Instead, she had been his anchor in the storm, proving through her actions that love didn't always end in loss, that sometimes it simply meant staying present through the frightening moments until peace returned. In the quiet of the hospital waiting room, while Madison continued to sleep off her fever, Alex found himself talking to Sophia in ways he hadn't talked to another human being since Catherine's death. "I was so afraid tonight," he admitted, his voice still shaky with leftover adrenaline. "All I could think about was the night Catherine died, how quickly everything changed, how helpless I felt watching the person I loved most slip away from me." Sophia listened with the patience of someone who understood that healing required the courage to speak pain aloud. "Fear is natural when we love someone deeply," she said gently. "But fear can also become a prison if we let it control our choices. Catherine wouldn't want you to spend Madison's childhood hiding from her because you're afraid of being hurt again." Her words cut through his defenses like a surgeon's knife, precise and necessary, and ultimately healing despite the initial pain they caused. For the first time, Sophia shared pieces of her own story. How she'd lost her parents in a car accident when she was just 16, how she'd learned to trust God's plan even when it made no earthly sense, how she discovered that love multiplied rather than diminished when it was freely given. "I spent 2 years after my parents died afraid to care about anyone," she confessed. "I thought if I just stayed distant and independent, I could protect myself from ever hurting that much again. But loneliness is its own kind of death, Mr. Carter. And I realized that the greatest tragedy wouldn't be loving someone and losing them. It would be having the opportunity to love and choosing fear instead." Her story resonated in Alex's chest like a bell, awakening recognition he hadn't expected. This woman sitting beside him had walked through the same fire that had consumed his happiness. Yet somehow she had emerged with her heart intact, her capacity for love not just preserved but enlarged by her suffering. As they walked back to Madison's room together, Alex felt something shift inside his chest, not just gratitude for Sophia's care during the crisis, but recognition of her as a woman of remarkable strength and faith who had somehow managed to slip past his defenses when he wasn't looking. The way she had handled Madison's illness with calm competence, the way she had anchored him during his panic attack, the way she had shared her own pain to help him process his, all of it spoke to character depths he was only beginning to understand. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words carrying weight far beyond simple politeness. "For taking care of Madison, for staying with us through this, for helping me remember that not every crisis ends in disaster." Sophia smiled, and something in her green eyes suggested she understood that his gratitude encompassed far more than one night's nursing care. They were moving towards something neither of them had planned, something that felt dangerous and healing in equal measure. When Madison woke the next morning feeling dramatically better, the first thing she noticed was her father and Sophia sitting together by her bedside, something different in the air between them, a softness, a connection that hadn't been there before her illness. "Dad," she said, her voice stronger now, You stayed all night. Alex moved to her bedside, brushing her hair back from her forehead with a tenderness that surprised all three of them. Of course I stayed, sweetheart. Where else would I be when you needed me? The simple declaration carried the weight of a promise that he was choosing presence over protection, love over fear, engagement over isolation. Madison's smile was radiant as she reached for both her father's hand and Sophia's, pulling them together in a spontaneous gesture that felt like benediction. For the first time in 5 years, Alex allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his heart was strong enough to risk loving again, and that the woman sitting across from him might be brave enough to love a man who was still learning how to heal from devastating loss. In the weeks following Madison's recovery, Alex found himself studying Sophia with the attention of a man seeing clearly for the first time in years. He noticed how she moved through their home with quiet grace, bringing order without rigidity, beauty without pretension. When Madison needed encouragement with schoolwork, Sophia provided it without condescension. When the house felt too quiet, she filled it with music and laughter that felt natural rather than forced. Most remarkably, she seemed to understand exactly when to offer comfort and when to step back, when to speak, and when to simply be present. Alex watched her braiding Madison's hair one morning and realized he was witnessing something sacred, the kind of nurturing that came not from duty, but from genuine love. This woman who had entered their lives as an employee had somehow become the heart of their household, and Alex was beginning to understand that losing her would be as devastating as any business failure he could imagine. Alex began finding excuses to spend time in spaces where Sophia worked, drawn by something he couldn't quite name, but desperately needed to understand. In the kitchen, he watched her prepare meals with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of love rather than mere nutrition. She hummed while she cooked, unconscious melodies that filled the room with warmth, and her hands moved with practiced grace whether she was chopping vegetables or arranging flowers. There was something almost meditative about her presence, a sense of peace that seemed to emanate from deep wells of faith and contentment. You seem to find joy in simple things, Alex observed one morning, surprising them both with the personal nature of his comment. Sophia looked up with a smile that transformed her entire face. I think joy is always available to us, Mr. Carter. We just have to choose to notice it instead of focusing on what's missing or broken. Her words lingered in his mind long after she'd returned to her cooking, challenging assumptions about happiness he'd held since Catherine's death. The sound of genuine laughter from the living room had become like a magnet, constantly pulling Alex's attention away from work that used to consume him completely. Sophia and Madison's easy companionship created a backdrop of family life that made his office feel like exile rather than refuge. He found himself lingering in doorways, watching them work on art projects or discuss books, marveling at how naturally they had formed their own little unit of care and creativity. Madison bloomed under Sophia's attention in ways that reminded Alex painfully of the confident, joyful child she'd been before grief had stolen her father's emotional availability. But instead of feeling excluded from their bond, Alex began to feel invited by it, as if Sophia was creating space for him to return to his daughter's life whenever he found the courage to step through the door she'd opened. The realization that he wanted to join them, that he missed being part of Madison's daily joys and discoveries, surprised him with its intensity. One Saturday morning, Alex surprised himself by preparing coffee for Sophia and carrying it to the small garden where she tended flowers that had been neglected since Catherine's death. She looked up with genuine pleasure at the gesture, accepting the cup with hands that were dirt-stained from planting new bulbs that would bloom in spring. "Thank you," she said simply, but something in her green eyes suggested she understood the significance of this small act of service. They stood together in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching bees work among the flowers that were slowly transforming their outdoor space from forgotten corner to place of beauty. Catherine loved this garden, Alex found himself saying, the words emerging without his conscious permission. She always said flowers were proof that God believed in second chances. that something could look completely dead and then surprise you by blooming more beautifully than ever. Sophia nodded with understanding, recognizing the gift he'd just offered by sharing a positive memory instead of hiding from it. For the first time in months, Alex began joining Sophia and Madison for dinner instead of eating alone in his office, and these shared meals became opportunities for connection he hadn't realized he'd been craving. Madison's face lit up whenever he appeared at the table, and her animated discussions about school, friends, and dreams filled him with wonder at how much of her life he'd been missing. Sophia facilitated these conversations with the skill of someone who understood that healing happened in small increments, through shared stories and gentle laughter rather than dramatic confrontations. "Tell your father about the art contest at school," she would suggest, or "Madison has some interesting thoughts about the book she's reading." Gradually, Alex found himself looking forward to these dinner conversations, rediscovering his daughter as a person with opinions, dreams, and a sense of humor that reminded him remarkably of Catherine. The ease with which Sophia included him in their dynamic made him realize how carefully she'd been building bridges between his heart and Madison's, waiting patiently for him to find the courage to cross them. When Madison needed help with a science project about renewable energy, Alex found himself genuinely excited to contribute his business knowledge to her academic success. Working together at the dining room table, surrounded by poster boards and research materials, felt like a return to the kind of father-daughter collaboration he'd abandoned after Catherine's death. Madison hung on his every word as he explained market forces and environmental impact, her intelligence and curiosity impressing him in ways he'd forgotten to notice. Sophia worked quietly nearby, preparing materials and offering encouragement, but Alex could feel her watching their interaction with quiet satisfaction. She had somehow orchestrated this moment without manipulation, creating conditions where natural affection could resurface between father and daughter. "You're really smart about business stuff, Dad," Madison said with obvious pride, and the compliment hit Alex like sunshine after years of winter. He was remembering not just how to be Madison's father, but how much he'd always loved the role before fear convinced him it was too dangerous to embrace. The evening routines that had once felt like obligations began transforming into opportunities for quiet connection. Alex started helping with dishes after dinner, working alongside Sophia in comfortable silence that spoke of growing familiarity and mutual respect. She moved around the kitchen with efficiency born of practice, but also with the kind of care that made even mundane tasks feel meaningful. When she reached for something on a high shelf, Alex was there to help. When he couldn't find the proper storage container, she guided him with patient humor. These small interactions, passing soap, sharing kitchen space, coordinating the simple choreography of domestic life, felt revolutionary to a man who'd spent 5 years living like a boarder in his own home. "You don't have to help with this," Sophia said one evening, but Alex shook his head. "I want to," he replied, and realized he meant it. Contributing to the smooth running of their household felt like participating in something larger than himself, something that resembled the family life he'd thought was lost forever. After Madison had gone to bed with hugs that lasted longer each night, Alex began staying in the living room with Sophia instead of immediately retreating to his office. These quiet conversations over tea became the highlight of his day, opportunities to explore thoughts and feelings he'd kept buried for years. Sophia listened without judgment as he talked about the challenges of single parenting, the guilt he carried about Madison's emotional neglect, and his slowly growing recognition that healing didn't require forgetting Catherine, but rather learning to carry her memory with gratitude instead of grief. "I used to think loving Catherine meant staying loyal to my pain," he confided one night, as if moving forward would somehow dishonor what we had together. "But watching you with Madison, seeing how naturally you've brought life back into our home, I'm beginning to think Catherine would want us to be happy again." Sophia's eyes filled with tears at his words, recognizing the profound shift they represented in his journey toward emotional healing. The most significant breakthrough came when Alex asked Sophia to help him properly display Catherine's photographs throughout the house instead of keeping them hidden like shameful secrets. Together, They chose the most beautiful images. Catherine laughing at Madison's birthday party, the family vacation to the mountains, quiet moments of domestic happiness, and gave them places of honor on mantels and shelves. She was lovely, Sophia said simply, studying a photograph of Catherine and Madison baking cookies together. Madison has her smile. Alex nodded, feeling peace instead of pain as he looked at his late wife's face. She would have liked you, he said, and realized he meant it completely. She always believed that love should multiply rather than diminish, that our hearts were big enough for all the people who deserve a place there. The act of honoring Catherine's memory instead of hiding from it felt like a liberation, as if he was finally giving himself permission to love again without betraying the love he'd lost. Sophia's presence made this integration possible, her gentle acceptance of Catherine's ongoing importance in their family, creating space for healing rather than replacement. One night, watching Sophia tuck Madison in a bed with the kind of maternal tenderness his daughter had been missing for years, Alex finally admitted to himself what his heart had been trying to tell him for weeks. He was falling in love, not just with Sophia's beauty or kindness, but with the woman who had seen his broken family and chosen to pour her life into healing them. She had loved Madison as if she were her own child, had treated his grief with respect rather than impatience, and had somehow managed to create space for Catherine's memory while building new traditions that honored the past without being trapped by it. Standing in that doorway, listening to Sophia's soft voice promising Madison's sweet dreams, Alex felt his heart expand with possibility he'd thought was lost forever. This wasn't betrayal of Catherine's memory. It was the fulfillment of everything she'd wanted for him and Madison. Love that multiplied rather than diminished. Joy that honored the past while embracing the future. And the courage to believe that some losses led not to endings, but to unexpected new beginnings that were every bit as beautiful as what had come before. The crisis that would change everything began on a rainy Thursday evening, when Alex's carefully rebuilt composure finally cracked under the weight of emotions he could no longer contain. He'd spent the day fighting feelings that terrified him more than any business deal. The growing certainty that he was completely, hopelessly in love with Sophia Mitchell. Pacing the living room like a caged animal, he struggled with the paralyzing fear that loving again meant risking the kind of devastating loss that had nearly destroyed him once before. "I can't do this," he said suddenly, his voice raw with anguish. Sophia looked up from her book, recognizing the signs of a man at war with himself. "Can't do what, Alex?" she asked gently, using his first name for the first time and somehow making it sound like a prayer. Alex turned to face her, his blue eyes dark with pain and longing. "I can't fall in love with you," he whispered, the admission tearing from his throat like a confession under torture. "I can't let myself need someone again, can't risk losing everything a second time. Madison has already lost one mother figure. I won't put her through that again." His hands were trembling as he spoke, 5 years of suppressed emotion finally demanding release. Sophia set aside her book and rose slowly, moving toward him with the careful grace of someone approaching a wounded animal. "Alex," she said softly, "love isn't something we can control or prevent. It simply is, and running from it doesn't protect us from loss. It just guarantees we'll lose the beautiful things we could have had while we were busy being afraid. You don't understand," Alex continued, his voice breaking. "When Catherine died, I wanted to die too. The only thing that kept me going was Madison, and even then I barely managed to exist, let alone live. I built these walls around my heart because it was the only way to survive. But you," he looked at her with desperate longing, "you've somehow found every crack, every weakness, until I can't remember why I thought isolation was safer than connection." Sophia reached out tentatively, her fingers barely brushing his arm. "Maybe isolation felt safer because you were trying to heal alone," she said quietly. "But God never intended for us to carry our burdens by ourselves. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is allowing someone else to love us, even when it feels terrifying." The floodgates opened then, and Alex found himself sharing things he'd never spoken aloud to another human being. I blame myself for Catherine's death. He confessed, tears flowing freely now. I was supposed to pick her up from her sister's house that night, but I was stuck in a meeting that seemed more important than family time. If I hadn't been so obsessed with work, she wouldn't have been driving alone in that storm. Madison lost her mother because her father couldn't prioritize what actually mattered. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she listened to the guilt he'd been carrying like poison in his veins. Alex, you couldn't have known what would happen. Catherine's death was a tragedy, not a punishment for your choices. And torturing yourself won't bring her back or honor her memory. Sophia took a deep breath and began sharing her own deepest pain. I lost my parents when I was 16, she said quietly. They were driving to my high school graduation when a drunk driver hit them head-on. For years, I blamed myself. If I hadn't insisted on them coming, if I hadn't cared so much about having them there to watch me graduate, they'd still be alive. Alex looked at her with new understanding, seeing the source of her unusual wisdom about grief and healing. How did you survive it? He asked. How did you learn to trust God again after losing so much? Sophia smiled through her tears. I learned that my parents didn't die, so I could spend the rest of my life afraid to love. They died having lived fully, having loved completely, and their legacy deserved more than a daughter who let fear steal her future. Catherine used to tell me that love was the only thing worth risking everything for, Alex said, his voice steadier now. She said that a life without love wasn't really living at all, just existing in the margins of what could be. I thought I was honoring her memory by staying loyal to my grief, but maybe I was actually betraying everything she believed in. Sophia nodded with understanding. The people we've lost wouldn't want us to stop living because they can't be with us anymore. They'd want us to love again, to find joy again, to create new, beautiful memories while treasuring the old ones. Their hands were almost touching now, and Alex could feel the warmth radiating from her skin like a promise of healing he'd forgotten was possible. Madison appeared at the top of the staircase in her pajamas, having heard the soft murmur of intense conversation. She'd grown expert at reading the emotional temperature of her household, and something about tonight felt different, charged with possibility rather than the usual undercurrent of sadness. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, not wanting to intrude, but needing to know that the two most important people in her world were finding their way to each other. Alex looked up at his daughter with eyes still wet from tears, but clearer than they'd been in years. "Come here, sweetheart," he said, patting the sofa beside him. "Sophia and I were just talking about how much our family has grown and changed, and how grateful we are for the love we've found." Madison settled between them on the sofa, instinctively reaching for both their hands and creating a circle of connection that felt sacred and healing. "I've been praying for this," she admitted with the honesty that only children possess. "Not just for Dad to be happy again, but for us to feel like a real family. Sophia, you've given me back my father, and Dad, you've given me back hope that love doesn't always end in sadness." Alex pulled both his girls closer, marveling at how right this felt. Not like a replacement for what he'd lost, but like an expansion of what love could be when it was allowed to grow rather than shrink in response to fear. "I love you both," he said simply, and felt the last of his emotional walls crumble into dust. "Could we pray together?" Sophia asked softly, and both Alex and Madison nodded without hesitation. It had been 5 years since Alex had willingly participated in any kind of spiritual practice, but something about this moment demanded acknowledgement of forces larger than themselves. They bowed their heads together, and Sophia's voice filled the quiet room with words of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together, for teaching us that love multiplies rather than diminishes, for showing us that healing is possible even after devastating loss. Help us to honor Catherine's memory by living fully, loving completely, and trusting in your plan for our family." Alex felt peace settle over him like a warm blanket, the first genuine spiritual connection he'd experienced since Catherine's funeral. This wasn't betrayal of his past, but integration of all his experiences into something larger and more beautiful than he'd dared to imagine. As Madison dozed contentedly between them, Alex looked at Sophia with the wonder of a man who had been given a second chance at happiness when he thought his story was over. "I don't know what I did to deserve you in our lives," he said quietly, "but I promise I won't waste this gift. I want to love you the way Catherine would have wanted me to, completely, fearlessly, with everything I have to give." Sophia's eyes shone with tears of joy as she leaned forward to rest her forehead against his. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "All of us. Together." And for the first time in 5 years, Alex believed completely in the possibility of happily ever after, not as a return to what he'd lost, but as a journey towards something even more beautiful than he'd ever dared to dream possible. The broken man who had hired a nanny 6 months ago was gone, replaced by a father and soon-to-be husband who had rediscovered that the greatest risk in life wasn't loving someone. It was choosing not to love at all. 3 months after that life-changing evening of confession and prayer, the Carter household had transformed into something Alex barely recognized, a real home filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of love he'd thought existed only in fairy tales. Madison bounced around the kitchen helping Sophia prepare pancakes shaped like hearts. Their easy companionship now, including Alex, as a full participant rather than distant observer. "Dad, you have to try these," Madison called out, her face radiant with joy. "Sophia taught me Mom's recipe, but we added our own special ingredient." Alex joined them at the stove, wrapping his arms around both his girls in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. This special ingredient, he discovered, was simply love, the kind that multiplies when shared rather than diminishing when given away. The man who had once hidden behind work emails during breakfast now found himself fully present for these morning rituals that had become sacred to their little family. Alex helped Madison flip pancakes with the kind of playful concentration that reminded Sophia of the father Madison had described from before Catherine's death. His laughter came easily now, no longer the forced politeness of someone going through motions, but the genuine joy of a man who had rediscovered the art of being happy. "I never imagined I could feel this content again," he told Sophia, quietly while Madison set the table with the good china she insisted they use for special family breakfasts. "You and Madison have given me back my life, and I wake up every day grateful for this second chance at happiness." At the breakfast table, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of family life, Alex looked at Sophia and Madison with the wonder of a man who had been given more than he'd ever dared to ask for. Catherine's photograph smiled at them from the sideboard, no longer a source of pain, but a blessing on their new beginning. "I have something to ask both of you," Alex said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Madison looked up with curious excitement, while Sophia met his gaze with knowing anticipation. "Madison, how would you feel about Sophia becoming your stepmother?" "And Sophia," he turned to the woman who had saved them both, "would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife?" The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting to be answered. Madison's response was immediate and overwhelming. She leaped from her chair and threw her arms around both of them, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes," she exclaimed. "I've been hoping and praying for this since the day Sophia arrived. She's already been like a mother to me, and seeing you happy again, Dad, it's like getting my real father back." Her enthusiasm was infectious, filling the room with the kind of celebration that comes from dreams finally becoming reality. Sophia laughed through her own tears, overwhelmed by the love surrounding her and the beautiful family she was being invited to officially join. This wasn't just a proposal. It was a homecoming for 3 hearts that had found their way to each other through faith, patience, and the courage to love again. "Yes, Alex," Sophia said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I will love you and Madison with everything I have, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that God brought me to this family when we all needed each other most." She looked at Catherine's photograph and added softly, "I promise to honor her memory and the love she gave you both, while building new traditions that celebrate all the ways love can grow and flourish." Alex felt his heart expand with gratitude, so profound it took his breath away. This woman had seen his brokenness and chosen to love him anyway, had embraced his daughter as her own, and had somehow managed to create space for Catherine's memory while building something entirely new and beautiful. Alex had planned this moment carefully, producing a ring he'd chosen with Madison's help, a simple but elegant band that spoke of enduring love rather than flashy display. As he slipped it onto Sophia's finger, they stood together in front of Catherine's photograph, including her in their celebration rather than feeling guilty about their happiness. "I know Catherine is smiling down on us," Madison said with the wisdom that comes from surviving loss and finding hope again. "She always said love should multiply, not divide, and look how much love we have now, enough to honor her memory and celebrate our new beginning at the same time." Alex nodded, feeling Catherine's presence as a blessing rather than a barrier, understanding finally that loving Sophia didn't diminish what he'd shared with his first wife, but rather prove that his heart was capable of holding more love than he'd ever imagined possible. The rest of the day unfolded like a beautiful dream, with the three of them working together to prepare a celebration dinner that honored both their joy and Catherine's memory. They cooked her favorite recipes alongside dishes that had become their own family traditions, creating a feast that bridged past and future with love and gratitude. Madison insisted on calling her grandmother to share the good news, while Sophia arranged flowers from their garden, the same garden where she and Alex had shared coffee and tentative conversations that had grown into deep, abiding love. Alex watched his two girls move through their home with the kind of comfortable belonging he'd thought was lost forever, marveling at how seamlessly they'd woven themselves into a family unit that felt both new and eternal. As the sun set over their garden, Alex stood with Sophia among the flowers they'd planted together, watching Madison chase butterflies with the carefree joy of a child who felt completely secure in her family's love. "A year ago, I thought my story was over," he said quietly, pulling Sophia close. "I believed that happiness was something that happened to other people, that I'd used up my quota of joy when Catherine died. But you've shown me that God's love is infinite, that there's always room for more blessing if we're brave enough to receive it." Sophia leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of a man who had chosen healing over hiding, love over fear. "Our story is just beginning," she whispered, "and it's going to be beautiful." That evening, they joined hands in their living room for what had become their nightly family prayer. But tonight carried special significance as they thanked God for bringing them together and asked for blessing on their future as husband and wife, father and stepmother. "Thank you, Lord," Alex prayed aloud, "for teaching us that love is stronger than loss, that healing is possible even after devastating grief, and that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as ordinary moments with extraordinary people." Madison added her own prayer of gratitude for getting her father back and gaining a mother who loved her unconditionally. Sophia's prayer was simple but profound. "Help us to honor Catherine's memory by living fully, loving completely, and trusting in your perfect plan for our family." The circle of their joined hands felt like a promise, a commitment not just to each other, but to the kind of love that endures beyond loss and blooms more beautifully after surviving the winter of grief. 6 months later, Alexander Carter stood at the altar of the small church where he'd once said goodbye to Catherine, this time saying hello to a new chapter written in love and faith, and the kind of hope that survives even the darkest nights. Madison served as Sophia's maid of honor, radiant in her role as the bridge between her father's past and future. As they exchanged vows that promised to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever joys and sorrows lay ahead, Alex felt Catherine's presence as a blessing rather than a ghost. The man who had once declared love to be a lie that destroys everything now understood that love was actually the only truth that made everything else worthwhile. His journey from despair to joy, from isolation to family, from fear to faith, had taught him that the human heart was capable of holding infinite love for those we've lost and those we've found, for memories that sustain us and dreams that inspire us, for the God who sees us through our darkest valleys and leads us beside still waters where healing becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of faith, family, and the kind of love that truly conquers all. If this story touched your heart, please share where you're watching from the comments below, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe for more inspiring tales that remind us miracles happen every day.